go. All right. We have a lot of people rolling in fast. So that's some familiar faces. Good to see them. We'll wait a couple of minutes for people to join in, but I'm very excited by today's session. I followed Brianna for a while, and I think ever since we started Recruiters Floor, sometimes after we started Recruiter Floor, I've been following Brianna, and she's had a long list of accomplishments, and this is a conversation that I wanted to have with somebody who's gone through this entire journey, starting up, scaling up, and then exiting a recruiting business. And this, a founder with these qualifications are pretty rare to come by. So thank you so much, Brianna, for doing this. If I were to list your accomplishments in this industry, it would probably take us all day long. So I'm going to, leave your introduction to you. For those who don't know about you, why don't you give us a quick understanding?
Yeah, thank you. You're making me blush over here. So I have been in the industry for 17 years at this point. Just had my LinkedIn anniversary, which I thought was funny. But I started in tech recruiting. I've lived in tech recruiting this entire time. And I think like everyone that's in this room, I stumbled into recruiting. I was 22 years old and I didn't know what I wanted to do. I just knew I wanted to make a lot of money. I knew I wanted to have my own business one day. And so got into tech recruiting, loved it, did really well, really fast. I just understood it, but thought it could be done better. So within a year and a half, I started my own thing. I was 24, really didn't know what I was doing. I was just blazing through. And I think that that's what's really cool. I think about if I started now when I'm almost 40, I probably would have had a lot of fear inside of me. I would have maybe doubted myself more. And I just didn't doubt myself back then. So had Techies, my tech recruiting company, for 12 years. I sold it almost 4 years ago at this point, which is bonkers. And so, yeah, it's been quite a journey. At the same time as I was selling, I started a couple more companies because I'm crazy. And, so that was its own journey. If you want to know about that, I wouldn't do that again. But I love recruiting. And so that's what's cool about, I think, our relationship is we can definitely say that we both love the recruiting space. It's very challenging. It's very fun. It's fast moving. There's never a dull moment. And, you can make a lot of mistakes and still just keep going ahead. So yeah, now I have Thriversity, which is learning and development. I have Talent Perch, which is also really much at this point, Techies 2.0. I did have, and I know you want to talk about the acquisition, so I did have a non-compete. So I'm going through interesting changes now. And then I started the Millionaire Recruiter YouTube channel back in 2018 because someone on my team pretty much forced me to do it. He was like, there's no training in recruiting. You have to do this. And I was like, why do I have to do this? He's like, because you love to do it. And so anyways, he actually is the one behind the scenes that started it all. I was just the one that happened to be on camera. So, it's been a really fun journey. So thanks for having me.
Perfect. Okay. Couple of housekeeping, announcements. Joseph, I see you have raised your hand. So, we are going to have a Q&A session at the end of this. So if you have a question at any point of time, there is a Q&A section in the Zoom, a bar below. So, ask your question over there as they come up. And at the end of it, we'll ask all of them to Brianna live. And, so those questions and answers are not going to be part of the recording that's going to get mailed to you. So, perfect. Thank you so much for that introduction, Brianna. So I want to, so you started Techies at a very interesting time, right? It was back in 2009 in the wake of financial crisis, right? What was that like? And do you see any parallels between then and what, you are seeing today in the market?
Yeah. So back then, first of all, again, I was young, so I didn't really know any better. I didn't feel that crisis. But tech was always very hot. I was just in a very great space. There was not a lot of internal recruiters still, so we were needed like crazy. There was just, I think the name of the game back then was speed and urgency. It was whoever could get the resume out fastest, whoever could get the candidate on the phone. It was all about persistence. And then actually, when I think about it now, it's all about persistence now. It's all about the hunting just in a different way. So I see like they're very, very, very similar. And it's all about, it's still at the end of the day, I think about numbers. So now what I see, what I love to dig into is like, you see a lot of marketing and content. It's very, very, very crowded. We're all kind of playing that same game. But I will tell you, I think the ones who are hunting still, like I did back then, are the ones that are winning. And they're the ones that are more probably behind the scenes that are winning. So I look at it as a hunter versus a hustler. So as to the audience, I want you to like really think about it. Are you a hustler or are you a wisher? Are you just posting in hopes people are going to come to you? Or are you actually hunting? I think that's the question.
Perfect. That's a great way of putting this. No, you're right? Like, so there are certain fundamentals of sales and recruiting that never get old, right? The way you do it, the tactics, the techniques, everything changes, but the fundamentals remain the same. Now, from our previous conversation, I know that when you started Techies, it was mostly a contingent kind of a business, right? So, and it's, we are going to come to this in the later half, right? Like the challenges of scaling a contingent business, but just so that we have an idea, what at the peak, what was the scale of the contingent business in terms of the team size, in terms of the revenue, and how much time did it take for you from the start to get there?
Yeah. So I did start with I had a business partner at the time. And the reason why I really liked that at the moment was because I was the candidate person. He was the client person. Like, now we both did both. It's just, I'm a big believer in you're always going to lean on one side, or you're always going to enjoy one side more than the other. So we teamed up that way. And then very quickly, my candidate skills was really benefiting his client skills, because I think pitching a real candidate is probably the best way to get clients and the fastest way to get clients. So we scaled actually really rather quick to the point in our very first year. So we were probably closing about 100 to 200 a month, just the two of us, like really, really, really quickly. And so, again, 24, you're like, holy crap, like, this is great. So very quickly he was like, we have to hire, we have to scale. We need, like, there's too much business. We can't do this all. And I was really reluctant because I didn't know what I was doing. I don't know how to train. I don't even know, like, the only training I had was get here at 6 o'clock in the morning and scrape the job boards like that. Like, that was the training. And then I learned how to use LinkedIn. And so hiring was very difficult. I believe in hiring 2 people at once, because I think naturally 50% is going to work out. So I'm not going to put in all of my training and take away from my business to train just one person when I know the likelihood of them working out isn't great. Reason being is because some people they just don't have the gift, but they also just don't like it. So, so we brought in 2. So there was very quickly 4 of us, very quickly realized, like, within a few months, I think it's a 90-day process. So within like 90 to 6 months, I was like, oh, this is not a good idea. We're going to hire 2 more. So it's like, we kind of just kept trying to like bring in 2, and then we got to 6. So we got to 6 and we're like, oh, wow, this is really happening for us. And then we got to probably about 15 to 20 clients at that point, multiple jobs that they needed. So it was like the wild, wild west for us. And so we kept saying, like, do we bring in more people? I feel like we're leaving money on the table. Now, the Brianna now knows that the efficiencies weren't the way they should be, that we weren't paying attention to how great the clients were. So now, I am really big advocate for firing clients. If you're working, if you're working anything, contingency, retained, in my opinion, it doesn't matter. You have to fire the clients to work out for you. So I actually think if I could go how I will build, because I'm going to build again, I'm going to do 6 to 8 people teams. I think that's sustainable, that's efficient, and that people can hold tight to their numbers.
Perfect. So how much time did it take for you to go from 2 people to 6 people? About a year?
A year. Yeah.
Wow, that's fast. That's really, really fast. No, that's perfect. Okay, so I think so another housekeeping announcement. We are going to have a few polls running to get a better understanding about you, what kind of content we can serve you better. So Sagrika is going to run that poll for us. So I think whenever that poll runs, it will show up and do vote or give your answers on that polls, right? So moving on. You mentioned something very interesting, right? Like hiring in pairs. It's something we do in our sales setup as well, because two people who are hired together, they inadvertently they kind of start salespeople are inherently competitive, so they start competing with each other, making both of them better than they could have been otherwise, right? So that's the logic why we hire in pairs. Was it the same or any other kind of thought process?
Yeah, a very similar logic. So my boss did that. So that's something I stole from my boss. And I was, he was very, he liked to hire people that, went to college, and I didn't. I went to fashion school. And so I was against this superstar from enterprise, rent a car that had a degree. And I was so hungry. I wanted to make sure, and they very much pitted you against each other. So I wanted to make sure that I did a better job than she did because I was considered the underdog. So I kind of took that same vibe, and to your thing was like, not only are you kind of competing against each other, but more importantly, I want you to bond over what you're going through at the same time. So like for me, I think about who my best friend is now, and it was someone that I went through a pregnancy and had a baby within 4 days of us. It's because we're bonding during that we're going through the same thing, and we're not being like, oh my God, am I crazy? Or is this normal? And I think that when you're doing sales too, it's like, oh my God, are people getting back to your messages? No, me too. Hey, what's working for you? So it instantly becomes a really cool, just mini team essentially, where they get to bond, they get to vent, they get to push each other. And I really think two's great, because when you have 3 people, there's always a third person out. Now I don't know if you want to talk about this now or later, I did eventually get to hiring 6 at a time.
Oh, wow.
Which was an experiment. It actually went really, really, really well because I had tested it a few times, because in theory, I kept with the 2s. I kept with the even numbers. And it was great.
Very interesting. Very interesting. So, but hiring 6 people at a time can really, really have a large effect on your cash flow situation, right? So, so that brings me to this topic, right? Like, you mentioned in the past that it's very difficult to scale a contingent business beyond 15 recruiters.
Yeah.
So you've probably, so take us through your journey of doing that. Like you're probably speaking from the experience. What was it like? How did you scale? How did you scale back? What made you realize that, okay, contingent only, this is probably the ceiling. And after that, we have to do something else, right? So what was your thought process?
Yeah. So, I actually, the past 15 came from, I don't know if the audience is aware of Bink, but Bink was the first company, recruiting company to be sold to a public company, to a tech company, which was Robinhood. And so I happened to reach out to that founder, and it's just like, kind of a newbie. I'm like, hey, how did you do it? Like, I was really looking up to him. Like, that was a while back. And, he's like, well, we do RPO now, because my contingency, we kept getting to that 15 and it kept failing. And I was like, you don't know what you're doing, so I was kind of like, still didn't care. So I kept trying to grow, and it would get to like 12 and I would feel a lot of pain. And then I would be like, okay, no, we can get past this. And so every time I would get to 15 and around there, it would start to crumble. And here's why. It's kind of like Wolf of Wall Street. If anyone has seen that, right? It's like this crazy room, and definitely we were all in office for sure. And then I ended up getting other offices because there's so much activity. I mean, we had 50 clients at any given moment, 50 clients. And you got to think at least 3 to 5 jobs probably each, right? That's a lot of jobs to fill. And I was still believe in being very niche. So there was really not too many off jobs all in the same, ecosystem. But there'll be outliers. There'll be the ones who can calm the noise, they can really focus and harness their own desk. But then there's other ones where you're like 50 clients times 5, like how many jobs is that to fill? And they're like, oh my God, it's too much. Like the brain can't process correctly. You have to niche. You have to have like 3 to 5 roles to fill. Otherwise you become what's fake busy. So the more people I had, the more fake busy stats I had, and then the more rules I had to put into place, the more like KPIs I had to have, because you can't watch over everything, and nor do I want to. And then I started putting managers in place, but guess what? Those managers always tended to be my best people. I don't want my best people managing because I'm taking them away from production. So then I'm like, okay, I'm going to take someone that's good, that likes to do this, maybe not my heavy hitter, that's good, and then they're going to run the team, right? But then here's what happens with salespeople. Salespeople only want to be mentored by the top dog.
Yeah.
So then it's
Absolutely.
like the respect. So then the respect goes a little bit differently, right? So they're like, why am I listening to this person? They're not the top person. I want to learn from you or this person. So it became really, really, really challenging. So the way that I fought through that was I made mini teams of 6 or 8, and I had 3 of them. And I chose them accordingly. I chose them between like the highers and the lowers, because I wanted them to just feed off of each other, the same kind of notion how I do in training. And that worked really, really well. So definitely mini teams. But again, what happened was, when we're all coming together, all running off of the same jobs, like it just didn't work. We had to get so granular to the point that I had to, or the managers had to assign jobs on a 3-week basis. So it was no longer a free for all. So this was more of like, hey, you all are really great, but you need to be told what to do. And until you get your numbers at a consistent level for 6 months, we got to assign you jobs. You cannot pick your jobs anymore. So then we had to do that. And then for me, I don't like micromanaging at all, but it was a wild house. So it was something that we had to do. And then I didn't like it as much. So I think it kind of comes from both sides. Wild house, and then I didn't enjoy it. So it's 2 things. So contingent's hard. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. And so much to unpack over here, right? So you mentioned something fake busy, right? Like I call the same problem running to standstill, right? Like I see it happen all the time, right? So it's something that a lot of founders, including me, have seen and have gone through. I want to here understand, right? Like in cases like this, right? Like your actual production, right? Like in your case, let's say placements or your fill rates drop, right? Like, and then you are kind of in a kind of a downward spiral, right? Like you still have overheads, right? Like your heavy hitters, as you said, are now busy managing instead of actually placing or producing revenue. And yeah, so you got you are in a kind of a free fall over there, right? So what I want to understand is that what was the fill rate, right? Like, so what is the fill rate if you're running a contingency only shop, right? Like, let's say you have not reached that scale where you are, where you have reached this problem. What would be the right fill rate that a founder should target if you're a contingent only shop?
Yeah. So I might look at it as a little bit different. Keep in mind, I think for the audience to know, like, remember, I do tech and in San Francisco. So I think every space is going to have a different answer. But for me, I needed my recruiters to place 1 to 3 people a month. Like that would be successful to me, depending on their level. And then my heavy hitters, like they're in placing up to like 7 people a month. But it's not always consistent. So I was just kind of looking at it, instead of looking at it like per month, like I just said, I looked at it like as 12 months and said, I needed you to average 6 to 36 placements a year. Like that to me, you can stay. Like you have a seat here at Techies or at Talent Perch or, whatever. I think that's really important. So I think you have to think about like, what would be the break even for you to have an employee? And then of course you don't want to break even because there's too much of a headache. So I think what a lot of recruiting agencies come into is that, oh, my break even's fine because I wouldn't have had this revenue and I wouldn't have had this client, and now this client's using me over here and they're not costing me money. But they are costing you money because now for me, what happened was my top dogs are like, why do we have these people who are like barely hitting goal, like, or not even hitting goal? And it was like shame on me for keeping them kind of a thing. And it was like, you're making me look bad by not having these top recruiters. And so it definitely caused turmoil, and it caused more management, and it caused us to look at KPIs. So that time and like the mental spend is way more than a break even, not costing me employee. So, I think I answered your question. I was tangenting on that one.
No, that's perfect. What would be the compensation structure for a typical recruiter at Techies then?
Yeah. So I had two. Like I said in the beginning, I am a fan of separating the candidates and clients. Everybody did both, but I would give commission based off of what they did really well, and I would have them make a decision. So for me, I would say you get 25% of the full fee if you have the candidate. Now, if you're like, hey, I want to focus on clients, then you're like, fine. You get 25% every time your client hires of the full fee. And then if you place a candidate, you get 20%. If they're both your deal, it's 45%.
Okay.
I think as an agency, now, again, as I had people for like 6 to 10, 11 years, so naturally their commission structure went up. So I'm talking like if someone enters my door today, what I started doing was 20 and 20. And then, they would go up to 20, 25. And then I had people say, hey, I like them both. I don't want to like limit myself. So I would give them 22.5% for both. So for candidate and for client. And then of course, everybody wanted double dips, right? Because then they're making a lot of money. Now the top dog. So I had $2 million billers on my team for 2 consecutive years, actually. And so they're making like way more money. I think, at the top, the most commission I gave was like 62%, which I don't think I would do again. Because I also was giving some profit share because I was having them mentor as well. So there was like a lot of like moving parts. So looking back, I think I'd be more interested in giving profit share as opposed to raising commissions, because naturally, I mean, like, let's just think about the cost of LinkedIn Recruiter. I was spending $150,000 a year, so it's like, well worth it. Right. But there's a lot of cost, the bigger the team you get, which is again, why, like when you have contingency, nothing's guaranteed. So it's like, I'm running all of this cost for 15 plus people and there's no guaranteed money, so if we have a down month, I'm in a lot of pain, so another thing to think about.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, you're right. And a lot of founders that I've seen a lot of founders kind of, start and then scale up, and it's amazing to see their journeys. And one of the founders who started contingent and then, started doing a lot of contract. So they are into IT staffing, so not too far from tech, but, more traditional IT. And he, when I was speaking with him, he said that, I love contingency. That's what gives me the thrills. But, once we were like 7, 8 people, I wasn't sure if I have 2 bad months, am I going to have to dip from my, savings pool to kind of pay these people, right? Like that was a no-go for me. So I said, okay, you know what? I'm going to compromise on my margins. But, let me have at least some part of my revenue, some part of my team that is working contract where I know guaranteed once I've made the placement for next 1 year, for next 6 months, for that duration of the contract, I'm going to have this much cash flow, right? So, and with that guaranteed cash flow, I can, land my sales, marketing, headcount, everything around that. So it gives me much better visibility. So, it made a lot of sense to me.
So I also love the thrill of contingency. Like the bigger hits, all of those things, like not knowing. And, you know, like I'll never forget a July where we hit like over 750, you know, it's like that's some cool stuff, right? You know, it's exciting. Now what I do though, is there's no base salary. Everybody's full commission. So, and then the way I work that, and I know people get confused when I say this, so I'll try to say it slow, is essentially everyone would have their commission sheet. Okay. And like, let's just say you earned $30K of commission. I'm going to have a meeting with you and I'm going to say, hey, we're going to take your $30K and average it out for 3 months. So you're going to make $10K. So I, behind the scenes, was almost like their financial planner, you know, whereas I stayed very close to what their commissions were. And I made them feel like they were still making good money, but they weren't taking it all. So there wasn't like a Mayday moment because their draw was 3,000. So I would never get too far into draws. The most I would go out of paying them just a 3K a month would be 3 months. Right. But we would have already had those conversations before the draw even happens, which is really, really important. So I think for agency owners that do want to rock and roll on contingency, I definitely recommend doing full commission. I've done both, by the way. I've experimented with all of these structures. I've given 40 to even 60K a year, lower commissions naturally, right? But all those employees that I've done that for came to me within months and asked to go full commission because they saw we're very transparent. We would put all of our deals up on the board. Everyone would know how much everyone was making. And I still believe that today, you know? And so they saw, wait a minute. And I would even put on their commission sheet, if you were full commission, this is what you would make. So it would kind of taunt them a little bit. And they would go full commission, which as an owner makes me happy because I don't have to pay out a base and I don't have to have hard conversations all the time.
That's perfect. Yeah. You know, and that's what gets salespeople. That's what gets recruiters going, right? So everybody's trying to one up each other. And, you know, you can see like 10-15% lift in everybody's performance just with that. I've seen that happen across a lot of sales teams as well. Now, since that's a great insight into comp structure. We are going to change gears a little bit, right? So you know, as you kind of struggle to scale beyond a certain point with just contingent only, you got into RPO, right? Like you did majority RPO. Is that right, Brianna?
It was by accident, actually. So who eventually bought us, a firm, the fintech company, they came to us and they were like, we need to hire more, like a lot more. And but we don't have time to get our own recruiters. Can we have your team? Can we borrow your team? And at the time, like, I didn't really know what RPO was. I never had been in the game. I like contingency. And I was like, no, you can't have my recruit. That doesn't make any sense. So then we started like thinking back, well, what are the premiums we could charge? So we ended up like, in the good old days, like a couple of years ago, like I was charging $32,000 a month for people, which is crazy. But on the flip side, now that person's not contingency. So now that 1 to 2 deals, like technically I'm losing money on that deal, but it's guaranteed money to your point, right?
Absolutely.
So it's definitely an interesting vibe. For me though, RPO, although proven revenue, you can sleep at night, you can, forecast, you can, sign like long contracts and stuff like that. And again, it's great. It's good money. Like for sure it's good money. And we're able to really shine and like own more of a process. And I think being a external recruiter, having that control is also really nice, right? So there's all of these great things with it. But for me, it's too much of a management headache. It was like I now had 2 employees. So like, for example, like if I'm renting out my employee to a company, I'm also having to manage them and manage the client in a different manner because they're internal. So it was a big headache for me. Then I had to pay more money to get more of a management. So I didn't love it. But anyways, but again, what I thought was really cool is I kept half of the company RPO and half contingency. That to me was a really great spot. And I loved it. The revenue was flowing on both sides. I made sure that I had a nice mix over at the RPOs, which, junior to senior levels. I made sure my heavy hitters were not in RPO. My heavy hitters were contingency. And then if my RPO recruiters wanted to dip into contingency in their free time, they could. So during the RPO, I had to switch contingency recruiters to a salary.
Right.
So it was stressful. Like, it's so, I think about it being like, oh my God, like it technically two companies into one, and it was a headache, but that was definitely the most profitable time.
Right.
And the busiest time. So that was, and I also think it was just kind of towards the market. So yeah, so I won RPO. And then because it was confusing, and it was confusing to clients, I said, okay, that's it. Techies is contingency. Talent perch I made is going to be RPO. And I made my very long-term employee, Emily, CEO of Techies, and I was CEO of Talent Perch. And I basically borrowed some employees from Techies, the ones who are good recruiters, but were like, maybe I don't want to be, all commission. Took some of them, split the team up. So now it was very manageable to have two companies running, one RPO, one contingency. And in the midst of all of that, a firm loved the RPO, from it, that they were like, we want your whole team. So that was those were very long, drawn out conversations because I didn't want to sell. So,
yeah.
So that's how I went. Yeah.
So once they said, right, like, Brianna, we love your team. We want to, have a conversation about acquisition, whatever way they put it. How long did it take, for the acquisition to happen? And can you give us a little bit of an understanding of, if a founder has to start today, what he or she needs to do to make their business a right acquisition target, right? Like whether by other recruiting businesses or by, tech companies, acquire and absorb as part of their TA teams, right? So what does a founder has to do today?
Yeah, you just got me excited. I kind of sit up differently. Okay, because I'm going to do things very differently. First of all, I know as agency owners, like, you're doing everything, right? Or you're doing your books, your marketing, you're like everything. Okay, here's what you have to do. Your books have to be super clean. Your data has to be very strong. So at least I was really good on that. As far as like, how many resumes were sent, like through each stage, like all of those things from offer to close. I knew my diversity numbers really well. That's really important. And so I think you have two ways to look at this. Do you want to sell via an acquisition, or do you want to sell the company? If you want to sell the company as a recruiting agency, you're going to have either like the staffing thing with contracts, or you need to be RPO. You're not going to, more than likely, you're not going to sell a contingency business, because contingency, of course, is by those people, right? There is no guaranteed money. But if you're like saying, hey, you know what? I want to just do an acquisition, maybe even get some stock. There's some cool stuff in that. Then make sure that you have the best, well-rounded team, and all of their data. Even down to who they've placed, where they're at. I mean, there's like a lot of like organization that needs to go into this. But if you start from the beginning, it's super simple, because they will ask you for the last 3 years. So you have to make sure that you're well organized instead of scrambling in the back, trying to be like, oh my God, I didn't do all of this stuff. I think recruiters look at this data as admin work. Like for example, in Recruiter Flow, I gotta enter in like my interviews. I gotta, do all of that. I gotta put in my offer, even if they didn't accept. You have to do that. Like, I can't stress that enough. If you want to sell, you have to put that stuff in there. And then speaking to the ATS, you have to have an ATS. Yes. Could you run lean on an Excel spreadsheet? Absolutely. I've done it for a really, really long time. And I suggested just at first, because you need to figure out what ATS works for you. Which is why I like Recruiter Flow so much, because you can customize all of this stuff. But it's important because you can sell your database. It's worth at least $10,000. Like I bet you anyone today, probably however many participants are in this thing, you probably would pay me $5 to $10K for my database, just starting out. Think about how much someone would pay me that's been doing this for a while. I have a whole beautiful thing of data for people, and that's something that was taken in the acquisition. So
perfect. Now, thank you so much for those insights. We have a few minutes before we go into the Q&A, Brianna. So I'm going to, I have a couple of questions. We are going to do rapid fire. These are numbers-oriented questions. So we are not going to go into a lot of details and explanations. But just, so the idea is there is not a lot of information or knowledge around, especially for recruiting founders, on, what makes my business a better quality business than any other business, right? So, if I had to ask somebody who's acquiring a business, right? Like say business A versus business B, both are making $1 million, both grew 20% in last 1 year, right? And both have exactly the same margins, exactly the same team size. Which business should I acquire, right? And there isn't a lot of really great answers around that question, right? So you've done this, right? So you understand this business really, really well. So just want to kind of get an idea about raw numbers, right? So what was your client retention rate like with techies, and what would you recommend in the environment today, a client retention rate that a founder should aim for?
Yeah, I think you should retain about 80% of your clients for sure. But that's also because, sorry, I know you told me not to talk more, but that's because you have to make sure that you're only really taking the ones that you want and that work for you, and that you're interviewing as much as they're interviewing you. So 80%, yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, that tracks, right? Like we are seeing this with a lot of our, fastest growing customers as well. They're going to come out with a lot of this interesting data very soon. So stay tuned for that. Revenue concentration is something that a lot of founders worry about. So what did your top 20% of the customers contribute in terms of percentage to your revenue? Top 20% of customers.
Yeah. So unfortunately, towards the end, I had like one of my top clients contribute 62% of revenue 1 year. And that's scary.
So that's scary.
That's scary. Because there's too much focus. But I think in a perfect world, it's more of like 12 to 25%. They're contributing. I like to spread things really nicely. That means the relationships are spread as well. So I had lots of companies that were like anywhere from like 5 to 7%. Like that makes me happy, but the top ones are going to be more.
Yeah, perfect. No, that makes sense. In fact, what we are seeing is the businesses that are growing faster have higher revenue concentration than the businesses that are growing rather slower, which is confounding, but it is what the data is telling us. What was your average revenue per recruiter? Maybe at peak, maybe at the bottom. What was the range like?
The bottom would be 350 would be the average, and then the top average would be closer to 500 to 600.
Okay. Wow. So a lot of range. So, and if let's say I was billing somewhere in between, right? Like I was a recruiter, I was billing $450K, I'm probably taking home 50%, 55% of it over the year. Is that how the math
depending on what they do, between 25 to 50% is what they would take home. So you're making at least 125, right?
Right. Perfect. Okay. Makes sense. And I know we talked about this, but we didn't really get to the number. What was your fill rate like when you were doing contingency only?
Well, so I think it's 2 weeks to build pipe, 3 weeks to finalize it. But again, I won't take a client unless they've already messed up themselves, because some of our clients' fill rate was like 45 to 90 days. And that's insane.
Wow. Okay. So, that's fast.
That's fast, you think?
Yeah, that's fine. That's pretty fast. 45 days is pretty fast, I would say. So I don't really have a lot of, that's not a data that I have looked at for our customer base, but just by intuition, I would say 45 days from the start to, the offer, or the employee starting the job.
No, to the offer acceptance, from resume sent to offer acceptance.
Oh, from resume sent. No, I think, that's not fast.
I was like,
I meant you start the search. No. You start the search, and from there, you bill, right? Like when the person joins and you bill. I thought that's 45 days. Then I thought it's very, very fast.
Yeah, no, that would be fast because there's 2 weeks in between. No, so I was very happy if we onboarded a client, and within 3 to 4 weeks later, we have an offer signed. Like that would make me happy.
Well, this has been a fantastic session. There are so many questions that are still left unanswered. I'm sorry, you're at the end of the time, but thank you so much, Brianna, for doing this, for giving us this time. And thank you everyone for attending.
So fun. Thank you all. Good luck. You can do it.
Thank you, Brianna. See you.